anyway, when do you use multi-day funding? Going back to this 30-day restriction that I mentioned earlier, that's where I'm seeing a lot of people who are needing a loan for more than 1 day. That there is this 30-day restriction put on the short sale letter, and as I said, you'll find it somewhere in the approval letter that says something along the lines that the buyer may not transfer title for 30 days after the purchase. And this clause, it prevents you from being able to do the back-to-back closing because the title company is not able to issue title insurance and close on a second deal that same day when they are reviewing all of the documents. Again, they have to ensure that it is a good, solid, clean deal. That's what title companies do. And if they know that you're going to resell it to a third buyer and they're reading that this short sale approval letter comes down and it says you cannot do that, then they're just not going to participate. They're not going to be part of a back-to-back closing. So in that case, you need to use multi-day funding. And this is, like I said, the dreaded item number 10 that I was referring to earlier. And there's question about whether or not this clause is even enforceable, whether it's even legal. But the title company is not necessarily going to be the one who's out there put themselves out on the limb. But they can't ensure what will happen in the future. All they can do is ensure what has already happened, and they ensure what the chain of title has been up until that point. But they can't ensure what's going to happen down the road. But nonetheless, the title companies, they take the conservative route and don't become party to a back-to-back closing, and multi-day funding becomes necessary. But if you hold on to the end of the call today, I'll be giving you some tips on how you can do these deals in not 30 days, but in 2 days. So hold on to the end, and you'll find out how to move forward with that and be able to profit from those kinds of transactions and not let all of your hard work go down the drain. Another situation where you're needing multi-day funding is that the C buyer's lender wants to see the seller on the title for X number of days. And the reason why the lender may want to do this, and I see it ranging from 3 days, 5 days, 8 days. And the reason why the lender wants to see that is they just want to make sure that nothing pops up after closing. They want to make sure that there's a clean chain of title showing that somebody has bought the house, held title, the title's recorded. If you look in the records, it's going to show, Joe buyer bought this house on June 5th, and then there's going to be another recorded entry that says, on June 15th, Susie Smith bought that property. So it's very clear in the records. There's no question. If it's too close together, they worry about maybe the recording won't happen in the proper order once it actually gets into the courthouse. So they'll have a specific number of days that they'll want to see. And in that case, what you have to do is that you need to buy that house and hold on to it for 3, 5, 8, 10 days before you can close on the second one. And when you buy it, you have to pay for it. So that's where multi-day funding comes in, and that's a very common situation that I encounter with people needing multi-day funding. So the other situation, or another situation I should say, is that you're selling the house to a C buyer who has an FHA loan, and your markup is less than 20%. Now, many of you may know that in a rare pro-capitalist move, the FHA lifted many of its restrictions on flips in February of this year, of 2010, that removed that 90-day seasoning rule that all FHA deals, any lender that had an FHA deal, loan I should say, it was just a flat-out requirement, no getting around it. 90 days, FHA would not insure a loan for a house that had not been held by the seller for 90 days. Well, realizing that there's a glut of houses on the market, that all real estate investors are not evil, and we're really trying to just make a living and provide a good way for the economy to keep moving, to keep the cogs greased, and everything moving along. They lifted a lot of the restrictions and began to allow the flips, which again underscores the legality of flips. But they still have some restrictions, and one of those restrictions is that if there is more than a 20% profit for the investor buyer, so if you buy it for $100, you're selling it for $121,000, then they're going to need to provide additional appraisals showing a valid reason for that jump in the value from the time they originally purchased it, and they're going to have to demonstrate that they have, put paint, carpet, air conditioner, whatever, that there's been some sort of capital investment in that property that made it go from the 100 when they bought it to the 121 or 155 or whatever it might be. They've got to justify it with an appraisal. However, if the profit margin's less than 20%, and again, unfortunately, you're kind of seeing that more and more too when the short sales, you're not getting them approved with quite the margins that there used to be a few years back. You can find some FHA lenders that will do all of the paperwork on the deal ahead of time, on the close of the A to B, like the appraisals, the underwriting, and all of the things that are needed, and then close on that C buyer within days or maybe 10, 14 days after the close of the original house. Now, technically, they are not supposed to be working on a contract that has a date that is before the A to B deal closes. But what happens in practicality is that each underwriter who's doing these FHA loans, there's a little bit of leeway for them to interpret the guidelines their own way. So you do see that. It's not the rule, but I have seen it. I have seen it enough to make it a fairly strong occurrence of how these FHA deals are going down. On the flip side of that, if you've got an FHA deal that is more than 20% profit, you're back to the original 90-day deal. That's again, you're kind of stuck. Have you seen other ways around that, Andre, when it's beyond the 20% profit situation? Have you encountered something that's different there?
No, it's pretty, from what I've seen out here, pretty cut and dry. That you're in that longer quarter year seasoning,
right?
90-day seasoning if it's more than that 20%. So,
right.
Fortunately, with the way the banks are just so tight with the purse strings, it's not a common occurrence where people are seeing a 20% markup anyway.
Right, exactly. So it kind of is sort of falling into play where a few years back, you could get these huge margins, and it's just becoming more difficult to get that. So a lot of times you do fall within that standards of the 20%, but generally, like I said, over 20%, you're just up a creek. You're at 90 days, and so that's something to keep in mind as well when you're doing your short sales and how you're marketing and just deciding what you're doing with it. So let's talk about fraud.